In the last video talking about Lefkowitz, we left off asking the question of what would happen if the Great Minneapolis Surplus Store had revoked its offer to sell fur coats for $1 right before it opened its doors after people had been waiting outside for hours. And this hypothetical alludes to a problem with unilateral contracts, which is known as the London Bridge problem. And so, what the London Bridge problem proposes is that you have a person who posts a reward for £1,000 payable to the first person to walk across the London Bridge. And so you have the London Bridge. And someone who sees this reward begins walking across, and right as they get to the very end of the bridge, right before they cross the finish line, the person who posted the reward poster shouts offer revoked. Now, the reason that the London Bridge problem is a problem is because you will recall that a unilateral contract is only accepted by performance. And so until this person passes the finish line across the London Bridge, he has not yet accepted this unilateral contract offer. And since the offer was revoked before it was accepted, there should be no contract between these two people applying the rules of contract law that we have learned thus far. And yet it is plain to see that there is serious unfairness in allowing this offer to be revoked after this person has nearly completed performing it. So the solution to this London Bridge problem can be found in the case of Marchiondo versus Scheck. And so the case of Marchiondo versus Scheck, the facts are fairly straightforward. You have Marchiondo, who is the plaintiff and is a broker. And you have Scheck, who is a seller. And Scheck basically enlists Marchiondo to find a buyer for a piece of property. And the terms of their agreement are that once a buyer is found, once Marchiondo finds a buyer, then Scheck will pay him a commission for selling the property. So Marchiondo has to find a buyer. Once a buyer is found and the property is sold, then Scheck pays a commission to Marchiondo. So this is a unilateral contract because Marchiondo is not entitled to the commission. There is no contract until a buyer is found. And so after this agreement is struck, Marchiondo begins work. Marchiondo begins looking for a buyer. And as Marchiondo is working, Scheck decides to change his mind and revokes the offer. and Marchiondo subsequently sues Scheck for breach of contract. So notice that we have the facts of the London Bridge problem. Scheck made a unilateral contract offer to Marchiondo. Marchiondo began performing it, but right before the performance was completed, Scheck revokes the offer, and Marchiondo is at risk of basically wasting all of the work that he had been doing trying to find a buyer under this agreement. So the issue that the court has to decide in this case is whether a unilateral contract offer can be revoked after performance has begun but before it is complete. And so the holding of the court is that such an offer cannot be revoked. And the court reasons as follows. So the court says that in this situation, where someone makes a unilateral contract offer and then tries to revoke it, that what we are actually dealing with is not one but two different contracts. So the first contract is the obvious one, which says that performance, and by performance I mean complete performance. So by completing performance, the person buys themselves a contract for whatever the reward was. So, in other words, once a person completes the performance of walking across the London Bridge, they have now sealed the contract for the reward money, for the £1,000 reward, and the person who made the offer is now liable to pay the reward. But the court also identifies a second contract, which says that by partially performing, partial performance, that is, once a person begins performing on a unilateral contract offer, they essentially buy themselves an option contract. And the option contract in this context means that the person who begins performance has a right, but not an obligation, to complete the performance. So, in other words, a unilateral contract offer is irrevocable once performance begins. And so this is the solution that the court offers for the London Bridge problem. Once a person starts walking across the London Bridge, they have bought themselves the right to walk across the entire bridge in order to collect the reward. And the person who makes the unilateral contract offer, who offers the reward, for someone to walk across the London Bridge, they are not permitted to revoke the offer once a person has begun to perform it. And so in this case, the court ends up ruling in favor of Marchiondo, the broker, that once he had begun work trying to find a buyer for Scheck's property, that Scheck was no longer permitted to revoke the offer that he had made. And so Marchiondo had the right, but not the obligation, to complete the contract offer by finding a buyer. Now, having solved that London Bridge problem, let's throw in another wrinkle. And let's say that a person once again offers a reward for £1,000 for the first person to walk across the London Bridge. But this time in fine print, they put a disclaimer that says we reserve the right to revoke offer even if performance has begun. And so, if someone tries to collect on this reward, begins walking across the London Bridge, and then right before they pass the finish line, the person revokes the offer, does the individual who walked across the bridge still have a contract claim against the offeror of this reward?